Lakota chief was grieving his dead daughter alone. A banished mother stayed and found family. The moccasin was still under the sleeping robe. I found it 3 days after we buried her. Small enough to fit in my fist, the beadwork her mother had done years before she died, blue and white, and one small red bead that had been replaced because the first one fell loose in the river. Wit Changpi. Little star. She had worn this moccasin until her foot outgrew it, at 5 winters. And then she kept it anyway. Kept it tucked under her sleeping things, because she said it smelled like her mother. I don't know how. Her mother had been gone 4 years by then. I sat with that moccasin in my hand for a long time. I am not going to tell you I wept. I had already done that, alone, the way a man does it, bent over in the dark so the camp wouldn't hear. What I did sitting there with that moccasin was something quieter and worse. Just sat. The fire had gone out. I didn't light it again. That was the beginning of it. The sitting. The not lighting the fire. My name, if you want it, is Tachaska, White Elk. I was 43 winters that year, and I was chief of a band of Oglala Lakota, camped in the valley between 2 ridgelines, in the country south of the Black Hills. Not a large band, maybe 60 people, 24 fighting men, the rest women and children and old ones. Enough to hold together, not enough to hold off the world, if the world decided to press in. I had been chief for 11 years. I had been a widower for 4. My daughter, Witjunkpi, 9 winters old, had been everything I had left that was mine in the particular way that a person is yours when you love them. She died of a fever in the turning of the leaves, one of those fevers that comes fast and burns hot and takes. The medicine man did what he could. The women did what they could. I held her hand for 3 days while she burned, and on the 4th morning, her hand went slack in mine, and that was that. After a person you love dies, there is a kind of madness that comes first. Mine lasted about 2 weeks. I rode hard. I prepared the burial scaffold the way my wife's scaffold had been prepared 4 years before, sat with the elders, accepted what they gave me. I did everything a chief does. I kept my face right. I kept my voice right. Then it ran out. Whatever was holding me upright, the ceremony and the duty and the motion of it, it ran out. And I sat in my tipi with a cold fire and a small moccasin, and I didn't have anything to hold on to anymore. The elders noticed. Of course they did. They were old men and old women who had buried more than I had, and they watched me the way you watch a horse that's favoring a leg, not saying anything yet, just watching. My uncle Heheka Sapa, Black Elk, not a young man, maybe 60 winters, he came and sat with me once. Didn't say much. Built the fire. Made a small amount of tea from something his wife had given him. Set it in front of me. I didn't drink it. He left when I didn't drink it. He came back the next morning and built the fire again. I let that one go out too. After that he stopped coming. Not because he gave up, I think. More that he understood that whatever was going to pull me out of the hole I was in, it wasn't going to be a fire built by an old man who loved me. Some things you can't get from people who already know you. I don't know why that is. I've seen it enough times to know it's true. She came into camp on the 3rd week of my sitting. I heard the commotion from inside tipi and didn't go out. That was new for me. Not going out when there was a commotion. I was chief. Any raised voice in camp was my business. But I sat there and listened to the sound of it, like it was coming from a long way away, from another country, from someone else's life. My cousin Shungmanitu, Wolf Runner, came to the door flap and said there was a woman at the edge of camp. He said she was Nitsitapi, Blackfoot, or maybe mixed, he wasn't sure. She was speaking a trade language mix that was hard to follow. She had come on foot. She had a child with her, a boy, maybe 4 winters. She looked like she had been walking a long time. I said, give her food and let her rest, then send her on. He stood in the door flap a moment, said, was there something else? He said. She asked to speak to the chief. I said, tell her the chief is not available. He went away. I heard her, a little later. She had a lower voice than I expected. I couldn't make out the words, just the sound of her talking to my cousin, steady and without much pleading in it. Then quiet, I thought. She's gone. In the morning she was still there. She had made a small camp at the edge of ours with the boy, in a windbreak between two boulders. Wolf Runner told me this when he brought me something to eat that I didn't eat. I said, "I told you to send her on," he said. I told her. She said she had nowhere to go. I didn't want to put a woman and a child out in the dark. That was reasonable. Wolf Runner was a reasonable man. Said, "Fine. Let her stay one more night, then she goes." The next morning she was still there. I went out to her myself, because nobody else was going to sort it out. The morning was cold. The sky that particular hard blue you get in autumn before the clouds come. My breath made mist. The camp was quiet around me. People going about their work, but watching me from the corners of their eyes. Watching the chief walk for the first time in weeks, it seemed like. I felt the weight of their watching and didn't look at any of them. She was crouched at a small fire she'd built herself, with wood she must have gathered before dawn. The boy was asleep, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days. She looked up when she heard me coming and didn't stand. Most people stand when I walk toward them. She stayed crouched, tending the fire, and looked up at me with dark eyes that were tired, but not broken. She was maybe 30 winters, maybe a little less. Hard to tell with someone who has been out in weather. Her hair was loose and tangled. She had a cut along her jaw that was healing but hadn't healed. One of her hands had dried blood on the knuckles. I said, in the trade language, "Told to go," she said. "I was told the chief wasn't available." I waited, I said. "The chief is telling you now. Go." She looked at me for a moment. Not insolently. Something else. Like she was trying to read something in my face, something real. She said, "Where?" I said. "That's not my problem," she said. "I was cast out by my band 3 weeks ago. My husband is dead. I have a 4-year-old son. You put me out of here. I'll walk until I find someone who won't put me out, or I'll die before I find them." That is the reality of it. I'm not telling you this to make you feel anything. I'm just telling you what is true. I stood there. The fire popped. The boy shifted in his blanket. I said, "Why did they cast you out?" she said. "My husband was accused of betraying the band to the Bluecoats. He didn't do it. But he was killed for it, and I was cast out for being his wife," I said. "Did you do it?" She met my eyes and said, "No." I can't tell you why I believed her. Something in the flatness of the way she said it. No performance to it. When people lie to me, there is usually something they do with their face, something extra, a small effort. She didn't do that. She just said no and let it sit. I said, "You can stay until the first snow. Then you go," she said. "That's fair." I turned and walked back to my teepee and sat back down. I don't know exactly when she started coming to the fire. Not to my fire. There was no fire. To the fire outside, the central cooking fire that all the women used. She began helping with the cooking. Nobody asked her to. She just started. She was good at it. Quick with her hands, didn't make a mess. Knew how to stretch what there was. The older women noticed. Old Chongtechea, crying heart, she must have been 65 winters, who had not warmed to a stranger in longer than anyone could remember, allowed the woman to sit beside her at the fire without moving away from her. That, in that old woman's language, was about as warm as a welcome got. The boy was named Makha, Earth. He was a quiet child with big dark eyes and that particular seriousness that some children carry. The ones who have seen things they weren't supposed to see yet. He followed the older boys around at a cautious distance. He didn't get in anyone's way. I watched all this from the door of my tipi, mostly. Standing in the opening, arms folded, watching the camp the way a man watches when he's pretending to watch the camp, and really he's watching one particular part of it. I told myself I was watching because she was a stranger, and strangers should be watched. I believed that for about 4 days. Her name was Towa. It meant, in the Blackfoot tongue, as near as I could work out, something like blue distance, the color of mountains a long way off. I folded it from Wolf Runner, who had learned it from Crying Heart, who had asked her directly, because Crying Heart always asked things directly. That was how I found her name. I didn't ask her myself. The cut on her jaw healed. The blood on her knuckles. I didn't ask about that either, but one evening I saw her outside my tipi. She had come to leave a bowl of food. She was in the habit of doing that, leaving food at my door because I wasn't eating with the camp. And the boy had fallen down nearby and scraped his knee and was trying very hard not cry, the way small boys do, pressing his mouth tight, eyes wet. She picked him up and held him against her side and talked quietly to him. She didn't make a fuss of it. Just held him and talked until the shaking stopped. I went inside and ate the food she had left. The first time she spoke to me directly was about 2 weeks after she arrived. I was at the horse pickets in the late afternoon, checking one of the stallion's hooves. He had been favoring it, and I suspected a stone. I got it out, a sharp piece of quartz, wedged up under the frog. And I was standing, working the stiffness out of my back. She came around the side of the picket line, the handful of dried grass for one of the mares, and stopped when she saw me. She said, "Is his foot all right?" I said, "Stone." She nodded. She went to the mare and offered the grass on a flat palm, and the mare took it. She knew how to stand around horses. Still and not nervous. "Wait easy," I said, and I don't know why I said it. "You've worked with horses before," she said. "My father trained horses, before everything." I waited in case there was more to that. She didn't add anything. I said, "Before what?" she said. "Before the bluecoats came through and burned what he had. He didn't rebuild. Some men don't." I said, "No, some men don't." She looked at me then, a clear, direct look, and said, "But some do." I didn't answer that. I went back to checking the stallion's legs. She stayed with the mare a while, and then went back toward camp. That night I built the fire. Not a big one, small, just enough to push the cold back from the edge of the teepee. But I built it, and I sat beside it, and it was the first time I had sat beside a fire in 5 weeks. I want to try to explain something that is hard to explain, and I may not get it right. When you lose a child, when you lose the less a person who was yours in that particular way, something happens to the inside of you that isn't quite grief, or isn't only grief. It's more like the ground you were standing on turns out to have been something else all along. Something less solid than you thought. And once you know that, once you've felt it go out from under you, you can't quite trust standing anymore. You stop moving because movement seems to assume a destination, and destinations seem to assume a future, and the future feels like a room you don't have a key to. What I'm trying to say is, it wasn't laziness, what I was doing in that teepee. It wasn't giving up, exactly. It was more like waiting for something I couldn't name, something to happen that would make the forward direction look possible again. I don't think Toa understood any of that. I don't think she needed to. She did, coming to leave food, building a fire at the edge of camp, caring for her son and for old crying heart and for the horses. It wasn't aimed at me, that's what I mean. She wasn't performing recovery for my benefit, wasn't trying to show me something. She was just doing what needed doing, in her particular steady way, with her tiredness, and her cut jaw, and her knuckles that had seen trouble. And watching her do that, it was the first thing since the moccasin that made the world feel like it had weight again, like it mattered what you did in it. I can't explain it better than that. The first snow came at the end of October. Light, just a dusting, real snow. I stood in the door of my teepee in the morning and watched it and thought, I told her first snow, she goes. I put my coat on and walked to where she had her camp, at the edge of ours. The windbreak. The 2 boulders. And she was already up, banking her small fire against the wind, Maka still asleep in the blanket. I stood a few feet away. She looked up. I said, "That's snow," she said. "I see it," I said. We agreed, first snow. She said, "We did." She went back to the fire. She wasn't looking at me with anything that asked for anything. She just tended the fire and waited. I stood there for a long time. The snow came down, just a few flakes, settling on my coat, on the top of her head, on the ground between us. I was aware of the camp behind me, the sounds of it waking up, people starting their days, smoke beginning to rise from the lodges. I said, "Where will you go?" She said, "South. There is a trading post at the river fork. They take in workers sometimes." I said, "Maka could survive a 2-week walk to that trading post." She said, "He's strong." I said, "2 weeks in snow." She said, "I know what it is." She wasn't arguing. She wasn't crying. She was just stating facts the way she stated everything. I said, "Stay through the winter." She looked up at that. "A long look," I said. "We need the hands." Crying Heart's daughter is pregnant. The hunting has been poor. "We can use the extra pair," she said. "All right," I said. "That's all it is," she said. "I understand." I went back to my tipi. I sat down. I could feel the fire's warmth. I had kept it going 3 nights in a row now. I'm going to skip ahead a little, because the winter is long, and most of it doesn't need saying moment by moment. What I'll tell you is what happened, and what it meant, and what it cost. She stayed. The winter came in hard, harder than the year before, the kind of cold that kills horses if you're not careful, and kills old people if you're not careful about that too. 2 horses, and we didn't lose any people. And some of the credit for that goes to Toa. Went out in weather I wouldn't have sent a man out in to check the horse pickets. And who sat up 2 nights with old Hihaka Maza, Iron Elk, one of the old fighters, when he got chest sickness and would have died otherwise, without someone keeping him warm and forcing broth into him. She didn't make anything of it. That was her way. Do what needed doing and don't announce it. Makha stopped being a ghost at the edge of things. By the time the deep cold came, he was running with the camp boys, getting into the same trouble they got into, eating like he was trying to make up for every hungry week he'd had in his short life. I watched him sometimes without letting on that I was watching. He had Towa's directness, that same quality of looking at things straight, not away. There was an evening in the deep of winter, the coldest stretch, when I was working on a saddle near the central fire, and he came and sat beside me, without asking. Just sat, watched my hands for a while. He said, in Lakota, which he had picked up with the speed small children pick up languages. "Like water going into dry ground," he said. "Are you fixing?" I showed him the broken cinch ring. I showed him how the leather was threaded through, how the ring had cracked. He watched very seriously. Then "Can I try?" I let him thread a piece of scrap leather through the ring. He concentrated on it with his whole face, tongue between his teeth. He got it through, and looked up at me. I said, "Good," he said. "I'm going to learn to fix everything," I said. "Why everything?" he said. "Because then nobody can send us away." I didn't say anything to that. I went back to the saddle. After a while he leaned against my arm, just leaned there, watching my hands work, the way a child leans against someone they trust. "That's the moment I'll carry." "Not anything," she said. "That, her boy leaning against my arm. I need to tell you about the night the men came." February. The coldest part of the winter. That dead stretch where the cold feels permanent, where you can't remember what grass looks like, or what water sounds like moving. The camp was deep in sleep, the fires low, the world outside the lodges hard and silent. I heard the horses first. The way they moved in the picket line, not normal restlessness but something. Alert. All of them moving the same direction, facing the same thing. I was up and had my rifle in my hand before I was fully awake. Something that lives is in you after enough years. There were 4 of them. Blackfoot, from the look of them. Raiders, not soldiers. Not out here in this cold for anything good. They'd come up from the south on foot, which meant they'd left their horses somewhere, and were intending to take ours. Or something else. It was dark. I couldn't see everything. I woke Wolfrunner with a touch. He was up instantly. 2 of the other men behind me without being called. What happened in the next few minutes? I'm not going to describe it shot by shot. It doesn't serve anything. We stopped them. One of them got into the camp, past the edge, and there was a struggle near the windbreak, near the 2 boulders, where Towa and Maka sheltered. I got there in time. The raider was big and fast, and he had a knife, and I have a scar on my left forearm from that knife that I'll have until I die. He was more interested in running than in fighting when it came to it, and he ran. I stood in the dark, breathing hard, arm bleeding, snow all around me, and Towa was there. She'd come out of the shelter, with a hatchet in her hand, and Macaw behind her, pressed against the boulder, very still. She looked at my arm. I said, "It's not deep." She said, "Come inside," I said. "I need to check the perimeter," she said. "Wolf Runner is checking the perimeter. Come inside." She said it the way she said everything. Flat and sure, not asking, just stating what was going to happen. I went inside. She bound my arm. Her hands were steady. Macaw watched from the blanket with his serious eyes and didn't say anything. When she was done, she didn't move her hands away immediately. She kept them on my arm, just for a moment, not tight, just resting there. She said very quietly, "Thank yous," I said. "I was protecting the camp," she said. "I know, but you came here first." I didn't answer. She moved her hands. Outside, Wolf Runner was calling the all clear. The camp was stirring, the way it stirs after something like that. Voices low, fires being built back up, people checking on each other. I sat there in the shelter, my arm bound, the cold outside, and I thought about what she had said. "You came here first." I had. I didn't plan it. Some part of me had just moved toward this place. Her and the boy and the two boulders. I don't know how to say what that told me about myself. I think it told me something I should have already known. Spring came the way spring comes out there, not gently. Wind first, a week of it, bending everything sideways, then rain. Then, one morning the light was different, and the snow was pulling back from the south-facing slopes. And you smell earth. Real earth. Not just frozen ground. I had been watching Towa through the winter, the way you watch something that you don't want to admit you're watching. Everything she did. The way she moved through the camp, the way she spoke to the old women, the way she taught Macaw things without making lessons of them, just doing them and letting him see. She had become, I don't know the right word. Not mine, not yet, not exactly. But present. She was present in a way that other people in the camp were not, which is a strange thing to say about people I had known for years and her for only months. What I mean is this. When I was aware of the camp, I was aware of her in it the way you're aware of a lamp in a dark room. Not because it's beautiful necessarily, though it might be, because it's where the light is. I've never said that to anyone. I'm saying it now because this is that kind of telling. It was Wolf Runner who said it out loud first. We were riding, just the two of us, checking the south pasture where we'd moved the horses now that the snow was mostly gone. The morning was pale and cold still, our breath-making mist, the horses moving easy under us. He said, not looking at me. "She's stayed," I said. "She had nowhere to go," he said. "She had somewhere to go by February." Old lame hand at the trading post. He'd have taken her on. I told her that. She said she'd think about it. I didn't say anything, he said. She didn't go. I said, "I noticed." He let it sit for a moment, and then he said, "She's good for the camp. The women like her. The children like her boy." I said, "I know," he said. "She'd be good for you," I said. "Don't," he said. "I'm saying it because someone has to," as I said. "You've said it, now leave it alone." He shrugged and let it go. We rode in silence for a while, and then he pointed out a place where the fence line had come down over the winter, and we talked about that instead, which was a relief. But I thought about what he said for the rest of that day, and the day after. I went to her in the evening. She was at the central fire after the meal, mending something by the light of it. Macaw was asleep in their shelter. They still had their camp, at the edge of ours, the two boulders, though she had made it more permanent over the winter, added a proper wind shelter, a line for hanging things. She'd turned it into something. I came and sat across from her. She glanced up and then went back to the mending. I said, "You should have your own lodge," she said. "I've been fine where I am," I said. "Winter is past. I can have the women help you raise a proper lodge." She put the mending down and looked at me. Steady look. The one she had used on me the first morning. The one that seemed to be reading something in my face. She said, "Why?" I said, "Part of the camp." You should have a proper lodge, she said. Ta-cha ska, why? I sat with that question. The fire between us made small sounds. I said, you've been what you've been here. What you did over the winter. What you do. I see it, she said. I did what needed doing, I said. That's what I mean. That's not nothing. What you are. What you have. I was not saying it the way I wanted to say it. My words were coming out sideways. I said, my daughter, Wichongpi. She died in the fall. I expect you know that, she said. I know. I said, after she died, I was not here. Whatever I looked like, I was not here. And then you arrived and you were here. Very much here. And that pulled something back. I don't know how to. I stopped. Looked at the fire, she said quietly. I know what it is to lose a child. I looked at her, she said. I had a daughter, 3 winters old. She died in the summer, before everything else happened. Before my husband was taken. Before we were cast out. I had been carrying that, and then all the rest of it came on top. I said, you didn't say, she said. You didn't ask, and it wasn't the time. You had your own grief. We sat there for a while with that between us. The fire. The sound of the camp settling for the night. I said, I'm asking now, she said. Name was Chiski. It means small wild thing. She was very small and very wild, I said. Wichongpi, little star. She kept a moccasin from when she was 5 winters. Because she said it smelled like her mother. Towa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that sounds like her, I said. You never knew her. She said, no, but it sounds like her. Something in how she said it, the gentleness of it, the way she said it with full knowledge. That she'd never known my daughter and still received the telling of her. Something cracked open a little in chest, not painfully, like ground cracking in spring, which is just the earth making room for what comes next. I said, stay, not for winter. Stay. She looked at me for a long time. The fire between us. The camp quiet around us, she said. You're not asking me to stay because you need hands. I said, no. She said, then what are you asking? I said, I think you know. She said, I want to hear you say it. I looked at her, across the fire. In the last of the evening light, with her dark, tired eyes and the healed scar along her jaw and her hands that were always doing something. Steady, I said. Stay because this is where you belong. You and Maka, this camp. With me. That's what I'm asking. She looked at me for another long moment. I didn't look away. Then she said, all right, just that. All right. I nodded. I got up and walked back to my teepee. I sat down beside the fire, which was burning, which had been burning every night since the winter. Since that night, she had tended my arm and said, you came here first. I didn't sleep for a long time, just sat with the fire, and thought about 2 little girls. One named Little Star, and one named Small Wild Thing, and about what it means when grief and grief find each other and make something that isn't only grief. She moved into the big lodge in May, when the new poles were set, and the women had helped raise it. The day they raised it, Crying Heart supervised the whole thing from a blanket where she sat because her knees wouldn't let her stand that long, calling out instructions in a voice that suggested she expected them to be followed, which they were. When it was done, she looked at Towa and nodded once, the old woman's highest praise, and Towa nodded back. Those 2 understood each other in a way that didn't need more than that. Makha came to stand beside me while they finished the lodge. He put his hand in mine. He did it without looking at me, matter-of-factly, the way he did things. His hand was small. I held it, he said. Is this our home now? I said, it is. He thought about that for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to learn everything here, I said. You've got time, he said. I know, but I want to start now. I looked at him, this small, serious boy who had come out of nowhere in my worst winter and taken to this. Like it was what he'd been looking for. And I thought about what he had said back in February, sitting beside me at the fire, as then nobody can send us away. And here we were, a lodge, a home, no one sending anyone anywhere. I squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. I should say something about what I became after. I don't mean the chief things, the leading and the deciding and the riding out when there was trouble. I was doing all of that again by spring, and doing it better for having been to the bottom of myself and come back. What I mean is something smaller and harder to name. I became a man who ate at the central fire again, who called the council when it needed calling, who laughed sometimes. Not often. I was never a man who laughed easily. But sometimes, when Maka did something that was the kind of thing children do that you can't help but laugh, who slept through the night instead of waking at 3 in the morning with nothing to hold on to in the dark. I became a man who was known again. Not just respected, I had been respected even through the grief. The camp was too good at their duty for that to stop. But known, seen. Toa saw me. Not the chief, not the widower, not the man sitting in the dark with a cold fire. The man. What I had been capable of, and what I had been broken by, and what I was trying to be still. She saw it, and she stayed. That is the thing. That is the whole of what I'm trying to tell you. The thing that matters is not that she fixed me. I don't think people fix each other. Not in the deep ways. It's that she was present enough, and honest enough, and steady enough, that I could come back to myself within the fact of her. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. There is one more thing I'll tell you. The moccasin. Wichankpi's moccasin, the small one with the blue and white beads, and the single red one her mother had replaced. I had it still. I'd been carrying it in my coat pocket since the fall. Just carry. The way you carry something you can't put down yet. One night in June, the long light evenings when the sky sits pale until very late, I was sitting at the fire, Toa beside me, Maka asleep in the lodge. She had her work in her lap, but she wasn't working. We were just sitting. That was something we had come to be able to do. Just sit without filling the silence. I took the moccasin out of my pocket, set it on my knee. She looked at it, then at me, and didn't say anything. I said, I think it's time to put it somewhere. She said, where? I thought about it for a while. Fire made small sounds. Outside the camp, a nighthawk called, I said. She loved the cottonwood trees by the creek. She used to find bird feathers under them. Falcon feathers, once. She kept that one for 2 years. Toa said, put it there. I said, tomorrow, she said. I'll come with you if you want. I looked at her. The pale evening light, the fire's glow, her face turned toward mine. I said, I'd like that. We went in the morning, the 3 of us. The cottonwoods by the creek, the light coming through them green and gold. I found a place where the roots made a hollow in the bank. A good place, sheltered, out of the weather. I set the moccasin there, covered it with a flat stone so it wouldn't be disturbed. I stood for a while with my hand on the stone. Maka took my hand on one side. Toa stood at my other side. And after a moment she put her hand on my arm. Not tight, just resting there, the way she had when she'd bound my wound in February. The creek moved past us. The cottonwoods shifted in the light. That's where I'll end it. Not because there isn't more. There is more. Years more. And I am still in those years. But because that morning at the creek is where the grief, down its burden. Where I did. Where I looked down at that child's hand in mine, and felt the woman's hand on my arm, and looked up at the cottonwoods and thought, here, still standing. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.